Please be advised that we are speaking in our own individual capacities and not representing any companies we may work for. We are not your lawyers, and any information given during this podcast does not constitute as legal advice and is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Enjoy the episode.
Hey guys, it's Katie.
And I'm Nicole.
And welcome back to Girls Gone Legal.
Episode 10.
Episode 10. This is oh my gosh.
It's crazy.
We should have had a cake.
Of
like
with a little 10 on it. A
Sophie,
funfetti cake.
Put one in here.
It's gotta be funfetti though.
Okay. Oh, actually, it was Nicole's birthday last week.
And I did have a funfetti cake.
And you also had a cheesecake. We had a dinner. Anyways, so it's happy episode 10. Happy Nicole's birthday.
And Katie got me blowout gift cards.
I got a gift card to get her hair blown out.
To get my hair done because I don't stop talking about it.
Also, funny quick story for the intro here. Nicole's the literal pickiest eater you'll ever eat in your entire Nicole's the pickiest eater you'll ever meet in your entire life. But I made her try caviar.
Yeah.
She didn't like it.
I wasn't the biggest fan.
She didn't like it, but she tried.
I like my chicken nuggets and my pasta. My Coca-Cola, but I tried it for Katie.
She did try. I was really proud of her. Anyways,
yeah.
We have a super fun episode today. Actually, one that I think is gonna appeal to a lot of people. I mean, I feel like first of all, this episode is the art of art law. Yes. So super fun, super niche, something that I don't think is talked about quite enough, considering how many people are actually interested in art law. So yeah, I don't know about you, but I've had like a couple people recently that have asked me about it, being like, how do I get an internship in art law? And like, I want to do art law. So, I mean, it makes sense, I guess. New York City, very artsy.
Yeah.
But
I don't know. I feel like art law is so interesting, and me and Katie both want to go into entertainment law. So entertainment is art law, music law, sports,
entertainment's like the umbrella, and then all these fall under it. But art law, being as niche as it is, it's so nice to get someone in the industry's perspective on it. So, on that note, we had a amazing guest. It was such a great interview. I love. So I'll let Nicole give the whole spiel.
Yeah, I want to give a little introduction for her. Her name is Nora Niedzielski-Eichner. Her education, she went to Yale Law School. She was an article editor of the Yale Journal of Health Policy, Law, and Ethics. She was also an editor of the Yale Journal of Law and Feminism. Really interesting. She also got her PhD in art history at Stanford University. She also went to University of Chicago, where she majored in art history. So lots of art going on.
Yeah, has a background.
Yes, lots of art background. Prior experience, she worked at Debevoise and Plimpton before she's at the firm that she's at now. She's admitted in the state of New York and the state of Connecticut, and her affiliations are at the Norwalk Common Council. She's a member. So we have a very, very interesting guest. Let's please welcome her. Welcome, everybody. Let's welcome our guest, Nora. We are so excited to have her on today.
Hello. Yes, thank you so much for coming.
I'm very excited to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, it's going to be so exciting. We're going to talk all about art law, which will be a lot of fun.
I can't wait. Perfect. I know we gave the whole formal kind of description, but I always like whenever I have guests, I'm like, please, we're gonna just sit here and listen. So why don't you tell us, I mean me selfishly, but also audience, a bit about yourself and kind of your background, and give us your whole spiel top to bottom.
Sure, I'm happy to. It's always fun to get to talk about yourself, right? And before I start, just standard disclaimers. I know you all do this on your podcast, but I am not giving legal advice. I am very much not anyone's attorney who might be listening to this. And certainly if you have questions, do not rely on anything I said, but please consult an actual attorney about the specifics of your situation. So I'm an associate at Cleric, Braun and Reisbaum, where I practice commercial litigation with a particular focus in art law, although certainly not all of my practice is art law. I came to all this with a pretty circuitous path. I'm a big believer in the fact that you will change your mind a lot in life and in your career, and that is a healthy thing. Everything you learn, you end up using somewhere down the line. The skills apply, the knowledge applies. So I actually did art history initially in college. Went to grad school, got a PhD in art history, realized along the way that I did not want to be an art history professor, and ended up going and doing political work for a while, and kind of led me to end up going to law school later in life. I joke that I got tired of being told I couldn't do things because I wasn't a lawyer, and I was like, fine, I'll be a lawyer. And I can do everything. Um, uh, but and so I ended up going into practice. I was at Debevoise for a couple years right out of law school, and then a recruiter called me and was like, "Hey, I saw on your LinkedIn that you have an art history PhD. Would you be interested in talking to a firm that has a some specialty in art law?" And I was like, sure, why not? I haven't used art history in probably almost 10 years at that point. And I think part of what's really fun about it as a practice, to say that I'm an art lawyer, that actually covers an enormous territory, right? Art law in many ways is a specialty more about your clients than it really is about the law per se. Most of the kinds of problems that we work through with our clients involve other areas of law: torts, contracts, breach of fiduciary duty, fraud. There's only, and we'll talk a little bit about the specific laws that are sort of art specific, but enormous amount of my practice is just standard commercial litigation. It just happens to be with clients who are dealers or artists or collectors, or whose work intersects in some way with the art world. One of the matters I got to work on not long after I joined the firm was actually a sexual harassment case. It happened to be in the art world, but the law that we're applying is discrimination laws, employment law, just standard sorts of forms. But the client, I think, was really assisted by the fact that my firm was comfortable with the art world. We were able to explain to a court why, this particular setting meant that, losing out on this opportunities had real career damage for her because of the way the art world worked. So we were able to bring specialized knowledge to a situation that was, in other ways very much impacted by sort of standard legal principles. So it's a very fun place to sit. I get to use different parts of my background and experience, but at the end of the day, I'm there to figure out for our clients how we can get through the problem, how we can sort of, find the best legal solution. And that's going to be pretty standard regardless of the area. So that, art law in that sense, I always say to folks, you really have to practice for a couple years and really just get a foundation in all of the legal stuff. You don't typically start out your first year out of law school doing art law. Yeah. It's much more of a kind of, once you've become a lawyer, you build a practice in that area.
Right. Yeah, we actually were talking about that a couple episodes ago, similarly in entertainment law, that it's a very common thing for people to say, I want to be an entertainment lawyer, but realistically, there's so many different, you could be a tort entertainment lawyer, you could be contracts, there's so many different areas, right. So it's like enlightening to hear that. It's kind of the same way across the board. But I know, sorry, bonus question, we didn't really talk about this, but when you say art, do you do is it like a wide spectrum of like art clients you work with, or is it very specific?
So many of our clients happen to be in the visual arts. Okay. And again, I think that's partially, one of the partners who helped found the firm has a lot of connections in the visual art world. And so and I know you guys have done some episodes on networking, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Finding clients is largely a matter of networking. So you build on where you are. But we've also represented, I have represented writers. We've represented musicians. Oh, wow. We've represented filmmakers as I think about it. So we do actually absolutely have a number of the arts that come through. I think our core experience is often with visual arts. Right. But again, the issues tend to be pretty similar. Yeah. And it's interesting as well. You also think about the ways in which, the other sort of pieces around the artist, right? You're dealing with galleries and visual artists. You're dealing with producers and production companies, with theater and with filmmakers. So there's also that similarity in terms of the structure. You've got the artist and then, the rest of the sort of team required to get that art out into the world. And that's so often where the conflicts arise. So even if they're the different medium, it's a similar kind of push-pull between the artistic vision and the folks who are like, yes, but practically, or here's how the money works, or here's how we didn't make the money work, unfortunately, a lot of the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. The crossover is going to be there no matter what kind of.
Yeah, I think people don't realize how much goes in to art law and how there's so 100%. Many different
it's more than just factors. A painting on the wall, and people, it's hard to see past that sometimes.
Yeah, because I even know with entertainment law, I'll say, oh yeah, I want to get into entertainment law, and people are like, well, what do you do for that? What do you, so like saying art law, it's like, oh, well, what is art law? So that was really helpful, just giving that background. And I think our next question is, what is a common issue that arises in art law?
Yeah. So, in terms of art world specific stuff, and again, number one thing I'll say, contracts, contracts, contracts. If there is one thing you learn in law school for the bar exam, contracts, because I would say probably the vast majority, 80% of our cases, are more involved breach of contract. Because at the end of the day, almost everything is going to involve some kind of breach of contract, whether you've got a fraud allegation in addition. But the art world does have some interesting sort of art world specific laws. One of them in New York is the Arts and Cultural Law 12.01, which is a law that specifically protects artists who have consigned their works to a gallery. So if you think about it, that's a particularly vulnerable relationship. You often have an artist who may not be the best business person, often is starting out in their careers, doesn't really have a sense of the value of their work, of how the system operates. Going into a gallery that has been, again, may stereotypically, but often has been running for a long time, is familiar, is the one that has the power in terms of the connections and the collectors and the money. And so this law was put into place several decades ago to help make sure that artists who consigned their works to dealers had some protection, that they had rights in terms of getting that work back, that the dealer couldn't use the work as collateral for loans that were benefiting the dealer. There's a number of parts and provisions of it, including the fact that when an artist has consigned their work to the dealer, if they want to terminate the relationship, the dealer has to return the work to the artist upon demand, even if there are outstanding issues that haven't been resolved between the artist and the dealer. And I mentioned this as an example when Nicole asked me what's a common problem that comes up. This seems very straightforward, right? This law has been on the books for a couple decades. Everyone knows it. We're actually, one of the partners in my firm is doing a presentation at Art Law Day this week on this topic.
Oh, wow.
Because we have dealt with no less than 6 cases in the last 2 years of people who are breaching this law in one way or another. They're failing their fiduciary duties in terms of maintaining records of the works. They're failing their fiduciary duties in terms of returning the works on demand, in terms of accounting for the monies that they receive from the artist and returning them and paying out to the artist. So I think it's a classic example of the kind of thing where it seems straightforward, but in the actual implementation of it, people get comfortable, they get used to the way they do things. Artists and dealers are not historically famous for keeping great books and records. That can really trip you up when you're running a business. And so, many of these cases will never make it into court, right? A lot of the work that we do settles. A lot of the work that we do is making sure that people understand their obligations and reminding them. And then suddenly the problem comes unstuck and things start moving. But, even some of them you will eventually see in court. There are cases that are litigated on this. And part of what's so funny about it is that the artists consistently win. It is a very clear statute. And yet, nonetheless, we're doing this presentation because it is an issue that comes up a lot. So it's a fascinating kind of area where, again, there are some artist-specific protections that catch people by surprise, even when they've been in the field a while, which is part of why art law stays in business.
For sure. I mean, on that note, is there ways that you can see, like trends you see, or maybe even suggestions you make when it comes to like those museums and the galleries then protecting themselves when you say like the artist always wins? Like, are there kind of those next or like preliminary actions that they should be taking so that they're not subject to claims of like these issues that may arise?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is an area where, again, a written contract is a very straightforward protection. I mean, again, this is one of those things that seems self-explanatory, but we see a lot in the art world. There is a history of things being done on oral deals, on handshake deals. And as a lawyer, I'll tell you a fun story. Another fun case that we had a great outcome for, and this one did actually go through litigation as public, so I can talk about it. We had represented an artist who consigned some work to a dealer in the late 80s, forgot about it, or maybe the dealer didn't return them. Regardless, somehow a number of the works remained with the dealer. Artist was unaware of this. The dealer goes bankrupt, and in his bankruptcy filings are all of these works from the artist, which at the time, literally the documentation we have of the consignment is pretty much a napkin. It's basically a small piece of paper. It's like, here's the list of the works for the, couple $100s they were consigned for.
Yeah.
They're now worth, a couple $100,000 per work. Wow. And we got them back for the artist.
Amazing.
Because we were able to show that the dealer had not basically had not properly handled the transaction, hadn't properly documented it, but we actually, that little piece of paper was a contract.
Yeah.
That we were able to rely on. So it's, so there is a lot of sort of funny art world stuff where you have these kind of informal deals that nonetheless are subject to sort of standard contract law provisions and other things. And we as the lawyers sort of help try to maneuver them into the, okay, this is how we interpret this. This is the standard framework. So, but we certainly advise, art merchants, dealers, do a real contract, be clear with your artist, really have clarity with the artist. What are you covering? What are they responsible for? How are the fees going to be calculated? Maintain separate accounts, right? Much like lawyers have a responsibility to maintain IOLTA accounts, right? When you have client money, you're a fiduciary for that money. You have to have a separate account. Dealers should be doing the same thing with their artist monies because they are fiduciaries under the New York arts and culture law. Does that happen? I don't know. This is part of why we're doing a presentation, to remind people of these kinds of things.
Right.
So it's, there are lots of actually fairly basic things people can do, and you get busy in a business, and it's a good reminder sometimes that you need to check in on whether you're really fully in compliance.
Right.
Yeah.
No, 100%. I mean, I think and I think it comes to your point again, where you don't go out of school and go into art law. You kind of have to develop that deep background and understanding of all of your bases so that you can come in a situation like this and really know kind of how to approach it 100%. Because I'm like, it makes sense. Would I ever go there right now as a law student? I'm like, absolutely not. But no.
But it sounds so
Right.
interesting,
Yeah.
You wouldn't think like, oh, this is, like you have to deal with legal things
Yeah.
to get your artwork back, or I don't know. I just don't think people think of it that much. You're thinking criminal law, you're thinking torts, but you're thinking contracts,
Yeah.
but not contracts for,
Yeah.
artwork.
Yeah.
And it's very an interesting field. And I think the next question is, for students that are listening to this right now, what do you suggest for classes that they could take? I know you said contracts and you really emphasize that, so definitely contracts. But what other classes would you suggest students take that want to get into art law?
Yeah, I mean, intellectual property, obviously. I mean, that again, copyright, trademark. There's this is another case where there's some actually really interesting art specific law. There's something called the Visual Artists' Rights Act, or VARA, that provides specific protections for visual art. So that's like a sort of an overlay of your standard intellectual property. But another really interesting issue that we see come up in very complicated situations in a lot of art making is joint ownership, right? So
Interesting.
copyright law and joint ownership, very tricky because both or all parties who create it own the work jointly.
Right.
And you start out, you're making the work, you're great buddies, you've got the shared vision. You don't sit down and think, well, let's divvy up how we're going to handle this if our partnership falls apart.
Yeah, 100%.
And that can be very difficult and very challenging because both parties have legal rights into the whole work. And so when they have different vision about what to do with that work and how to split it up, that gets very messy. So that kind of classes in intellectual property are super helpful. Business orgs, biz orgs, or corporations, or whatever it's kind of a boring class, but you will use partnership law, comes up all the time, right? Because again, many art world institutions, galleries are often formed as partnerships.
Yeah.
You've got a couple people in there. And again, basic principles of incorporation, knowing who, can you veil pierce, right?
Yeah.
If you're, if all the money has sort of gone up the chain, right? So those kind of principles, basic principles of sort of how corporations work, you will refer to all the time. So it's part of what's, I think, interesting about art law is that it really does make a lot of your sort of standard, doesn't seem all that exciting subjects actually then really come to life because the scenarios you're going to see are often interesting and juicy and have, I just was actually the art law day that is coming up this week. I noticed that they're having a whole panel on family law, right? Because
that's interesting.
prenups and divorce, when you've got collectors involved, right? So that can be an enormous, if you're a serious collector, an enormous portion of your assets, maybe your collection. How does that get split?
Yeah.
So really art law, it's pretty much everything.
It is everything.
Trusts and estates, right? Who did trusts and estates in law school? Who was excited about it? You want to talk about collectors. Trusts and estates is going to be a huge portion of their sort of long-term planning, but then also from a litigation context, because what happens after they die and the collection is split or willed, or God forbid, not actually
Yeah.
accounted for. And
For
then
sure.
so it can be really things that you don't even think about as sort of art law topics, then end up coming into a case, and all of a sudden you've got to become an expert on it. So
Yeah.
anything you can sort of cover in those sort of business regards in law school will come up.
That's actually a good point. I mean, that's a great reason why you shouldn't close the doors while you're in law school and say, "Oh, I hate this. I'm not even going to touch it," because, like you said, you never know when you're going to see it. That's family law. That's so interesting. They're doing a whole entire panel on it.
Who's keeping you on your toes?
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question more specifically with everything that's going on today's day and age. I mean, we see it in the fashion world with like the dupes and the forgeries and all that. So more specifically, art fraud. I know this is kind of a loaded question, but what constitutes as like art forgery, and what are the legal remedies and exits for victims of art fraud?
Yeah. So, art fraud can be really is fascinating. In fact, my firm sort of made its name, got a start in doing the Knoedler art fraud case. So this was actually one of the, I think, probably largest art frauds, certainly one that was ever litigated. And there's actually a Netflix documentary on it, because Knoedler was a huge and famous gallery, and it brought the whole gallery down. So it does happen. It happens probably less than you think from the movies, certainly on large scale. Smaller stuff, I think you do see more often. It's the kind of thing that you'll rarely see in litigation, but we have certainly reported things to the FBI art fraud unit. There are things come up. Artists are often themselves very aware of their works, and they'll see something and they'll say, that doesn't look right. What are my options about that? So in art fraud, at the end of the day, it starts from the basic fraud principles, right? Did they misrepresent what this was, right? What was did they explicitly say that it was a work by so-and-so? Did the gallery represent that work had been authenticated by so-and-so, right? So what are the fraudulent misstatements or fraudulent omissions that you then, as a buyer, as a collector, relied upon? Then you have basically a standard fraud claim.
Right.
You might potentially also have a breach of contract claim, right? Depending on what they said that they were selling you. So there's a lot of different kind of mechanisms that, again, look fairly standard. A lot of it's going to come down to expert testimony, right? This is where, again, if you think about sort of the steps you learn and through in law school, right? Discovery might produce really interesting things, right? It's possible that the person who was perpetrating the fraud, the forgery or fraud, you may have documents, you may have things that indicate that they had knowledge, right? So, document discovery alone, depositions certainly may produce some things, but then you're often very heavily reliant on finding good experts who really can not only sort of explain, themselves sort of visualize and explain what is wrong with this work, how they would know it's not real, but also, in a way that's going to make sense in a courtroom, that's going to be able to actually articulate, for a judge, for a jury, what's wrong with this painting. Why should someone have known it's a fraud? What makes it a fraud? And you can get battles of the experts, certainly, right? So again, much like discovery in any other matter, just with a very specific, you've got to find the right person.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I guess on that note, just like curiosity, how many cases would you say actually end up going to litigation?
Wait, I was going to ask that. I was going to say, I wonder how many actually go to litigation, how many settle.
I mean,
in your experience,
in terms of art fraud or forgery specifically, or just in general?
Just I guess like you said, I mean, art fraud probably happens more times than goes to litigation. So how often are you kind of seeing people come, okay, this is an issue, versus how many times does it actually have to proceed into litigation, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, other than the Knoedler case, I don't know if we've actually ever litigated another fraud case. I mean, it really is not, particularly on that kind of a scale, right? You're much more likely to see things like a studio assistant walked out with some stuff, or, someone was gifted something and, it kind of, they made some modifications to try to make it more valuable, that kind of thing. And that stuff tends, I mean, some of it is flat out criminal, and again, we don't handle criminal, you hand it off and you let those folks do it. Some of it is like a lot of other things, you let someone know that you understand what happens.
Yeah.
and they often don't want it to become a public
For
issue.
sure.
The value of the litigation docket being public is often huge.
Right. Right.
In terms of incentive for people to do the right
Yeah,
thing.
100%.
That kind of goes into my next question about like unknowingly selling forged pieces of art. So what are the consequences for a gallery or an auction house that unknowingly sell a forged piece of art?
It depends to a certain extent. If you look at the gallery, or excuse me, you look at the auction houses, they typically will have sort of long terms and conditions that kind of explain, when they will be obligated to take something back. And they will, again, it's like any other contract, they will, but it also depends on sort of their sense of whether they did or did not do their own due diligence. I mean, typically your auction houses are going to spend a fair amount of time doing due diligence. They do a lot of research. Things still get missed. And it also, we haven't talked yet about this other sort of interesting part of this whole story, right? Which is the role of the Artists Foundation. So more and more you will see that either the artists themselves set it up, or the artist's heirs and the state set up a foundation that actually takes on a role in kind of gathering and documenting the artist's work. And they'll produce something called a catalog raisonné, which is intended to be like this comprehensive list of the artist's whole body of work. And that actually generates then its own very interesting sets of issues, right? Because if you have a work that you believe is authentic, that's not in the catalog raisonné, then there's going to be questions about the authenticity of that work.
Right.
And so, on the other hand, a lot of catalog raisonnés and foundations are very reluctant to get involved in this business of authentication. They don't want to get sued. They don't want to take a position that drags them into litigation. And there actually has been some litigation around this, people suing foundations for refusing to authenticate work because that has diminished the value of the work. And so it gets to be often a very tricky and sort of messy area. And you as a collector or a gallery or a museum navigating it have to be really aware. You have to often understand the kind of unwritten, unspoken, someone's not going to give you a letter saying something, but the fact that they won't give you the letter is indicating something. Right.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of sort of, again, a need for knowledge and a need for care and due diligence. Any work of art, certainly any recent work of art, you should have a pretty good ability to do a provenance on, right? To do the history of the sales of it. The older the work, the messier that provenance becomes, right? Record keeping was certainly not as good in the past. Things fall off. It goes and sits in a collector's house for 60 years and someone loses track of it. So it can often take an enormous amount of work. I've done some provenance research in my art history days, and you're going through catalogs of gallery shows in Paris in 1930, and there might not be an image. There's just a description or a title, and trying to guesstimate based on the size if it's the same work. So it behooves everyone to do their due diligence while also acknowledging that you may not ever be perfect on that, and it can be challenging.
Yeah. Do you notice more times than not which cases settle and which cases go to litigation? Like the people that are selling unknowingly and not intentionally selling these forged pieces of art, are those the ones that would go to settlement, or would they go to litigation? No.
It again, I think it really depends, and I do really want to emphasize, like, I don't, certainly fraud and forgery is a pretty small part of our practice. What leads to settlement versus not is in sort of like a fascinating conversation. And it often has to do with the strength of the case, the party's tolerance for risk, the emotion of it. I think that's something that folks, it takes an enormous amount of anger to carry yourself through years of litigation, right? And so often, if that depth of anger and sense of betrayal is not there, people often come to the wise conclusion that it is a much better use of their time and resources and emotional energy to find a solution and a compromise. But sometimes you have a very clear case, and you're not willing to give up your rights, and sometimes we have to get there, and when we do, we are always very happy to take it there. We feel very strongly about the cases that we do, and we are always willing to sort of fight them to the end. But we also will absolutely counsel clients when the rational thing to do is find a compromise and move on with your life, because litigating is very expensive. And so it's also, it gets into this question of like, how much is at stake, right? If the value of the item at stake is relatively low, your litigation costs are often going to exceed what you can recover. And so you have to be very pragmatic about, the pros and cons of really taking it that far.
Yeah.
Right. Only a couple more questions, but I'm curious your thoughts on how NFT. Do you guys deal with a lot of NFTs? With
I personally do not.
Okay.
But I actually, when Nicole told me that she was going to have an NFT question, I asked one of my colleagues who actually does deal with NFTs.
Perfect.
So ask your questions away, and I will tell you what my secondhand knowledge on this subject.
I guess I'll keep it pretty general then. My question is more about kind of, do you see it changing the landscape of art ownership, and are there any specific things that are maybe specialized towards NFTs that you didn't see before that it's like, well, cautious, be aware of, or young lawyers coming into this, like, look out for this?
I mean, the number one thing that we see, according to my colleague, and we have actually dealt with quite a number of matters in this space, is the straight up scams. I mean, it is like every other area in digital right now. The phishing is rampant. If you don't understand how to protect yourself digitally, you can lose everything very quickly, because you're in many ways, you're in a far worse position. Even, if you're at a bank, right? There's often a hold for a couple of days, right? You've got an institution you can go after. These transactions, happen immediately and they're gone, and that's it. So being able to protect your digital assets is enormously important. And if you're going to be investing large amounts of money and you don't understand how to do that, you're really putting yourself at risk. So I think that is, that's a place where it's, art theft has always been a thing, but, it was very physical, right? And it was relatively rare. And this has been an area where people are really seeing real losses. And it also raises really complicated, or just challenging copyright and other kinds of issues, right? People, if they don't know how to adequately protect them, and someone clicks on it, and makes a copy of the image and then claims that they somehow have additional rights to it. And there have been some interesting explorations of sort of blockchain in terms of provenance stuff, right? As we were talking about before, right? Sort of the idea that maybe a blockchain could be a way of sort of tracking the history of the sales of a work. I mean, there are some things that may develop in this space that are all kind of new and interesting and experimental. But at this point, litigation wise, protect your digital assets. Know how to save yourself from hacking. Do not fall for phishing scams. Understand the limitations of your legal rights in a lot of the digital and cryptocurrency space right now.
Yeah, and it is so easy to just fall into that and click on something that pops up on your
I feel like it was also
computer,
such a
your
hot
phone.
topic, like, for a while there. Everyone's like, this NFT, that NFT. And it's like, at the end of the day, from a legal perspective, it's like, that is still IP at the end of the day, and you should protect it the same way you would any other IP. So...
right, exactly. And you really do face a lot of the same risks, right, as any other kind of physical asset, and you should be thinking about protecting it in the same way.
100%.
Definitely. All right, well, we have 2 more questions for you, because I could talk about this.
I know.
find it so interesting.
We have our classic closing questions that are relatively the same, but our favorite parts. So
we talked earlier what kind of classes law students can take to get more involved in the different, sectors of what art law involves. But how can law students get involved and experience in art law early on while in law school and, like out in the field? If you want an internship or an externship in that, what should law students look for?
Yeah, I mean, Art Law Day, which again, I think is going to have just happened by the time this podcast releases, but it is an annual event the Appraisers Association of America puts on in New York City. And it's a full day, of all sorts of panels on art law topics. There are books and sort of specialized areas. I actually, when I was in grad school, one of my fun cross-sector things, and maybe it's part of what tripped off the law school thing many years later, is that as an art historian, I actually TA'd for an art law class. And it was a kind of a fun, opportunity to help out. And the professor, who's unfortunately since passed away, but John Merriman, wrote a fabulous book. And part of what's fun about it is that it is an art law book that's like that big, and it's like 30 different topics of how these different areas of law showed up in art world contexts. So I think there definitely is. And there's also the bar associations have art law sections to them. So there's definitely ways to kind of get involved and be aware. I think also reading, there are several different art news kind of websites, ArtNet, Art Newspaper, that, and I think often they have kind of coverage of sort of interesting things happening in the legal art world. And that can be a good way to sort of get yourself up to speed and kind of understand, who the players are, what kind of problems start coming up, and just getting kind of conversant in the language.
For sure.
No, that was great. Thank you.
No,
I hope all the listeners, that was really helpful.
Yeah.
If you're interested in
it's
art
a good way to just, I love this question, because I know when I was like fresh into law school, it's like, how do I keep my finger on that pulse, and how do I get in the know as much as possible? So it's nice to kind of hear about it from someone that's in the industry, of saying, okay, this is the easiest way to kind of slot yourself in. So 100%. Our last question we finished off with always is one line of advice. So like short, sweet, one text message you'd send to either yourself while you were in law school or in your early days of your law career, or somebody in their shoes right now.
Remember to enjoy what you're learning. It is hard and it is exhausting, but it is also intellectually challenging and satisfying. And to really have that chance to dig in and learn something, once you are in practice all the time, the cool thing about the law is that doesn't stop. I learn something new virtually every day. I get asked a question that I've never encountered before, or, some issue has arisen and I have some vague sense of it, but I got to go back and dig in. And I think that is such a privilege of the legal field, to really be asked constantly to stretch yourself. And I think that as much as that's hard, it's also exciting and rewarding. And I think reminding yourself when you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed that actually this is pretty cool, that I get to keep learning every day. That was not short. I'm not good at short.
No, it never is. But no, that was great. It was great. It was amazing.
I didn't even realize it wasn't short.
I know, I'm
so
still listening. Yeah. I think, and you ended it perfectly, the way your last sentence there of you get to do it. And I think that's that change in perspective sometimes is all you need to just get you that last little push way through the semester, which I'm currently feeling. So, yeah.
Because no one's going to say it's not hard.
Yeah.
It's definitely hard.
Yeah.
But change the way you think about it. You get to do this. We're I remember, I was just thinking about it the other day, how 2 years ago when I was just getting ready to go into law school and I just wanted to get in. I wanted to get a good LSAT score. So the fact that I'm here doing it now, I'm happy to be here. So keep that energy right now.
Yes.
And it does really help people. That's the other thing I will say, right? People come to you because they have a real problem. They're not showing up because it's some irritating thing. And most of the time, they've really thought for a long time before they even show up, because they don't want to go through the hassle. Yeah. And they've tried to negotiate solutions themselves. It's very rare that a problem comes to us and we're the first line of solution. And so that's also all this work and knowledge you're doing, you're going to actually help people find things that help their business, help their life, help them solve a problem that they really can't get over themselves. And that's it's a pretty great place to be.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. No, that's amazing. Honestly, everything you've said, has just been so, I came in knowing nothing about art law, and I feel like even from these last couple minutes, a little bit with you has been amazing. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I'm so glad, and I love what you two are doing. I think it's a great sort of vibe and messaging, and really, again, getting people engaged early on and helping them over the humps to understand that all this stuff that seems so abstract is very practical and they really will use and will make a big difference in their future. So I've been enjoying listening to the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been absolutely amazing. I'm sure we say this, but I'm sure we'll get you on here again. There's 10 more questions I want to ask, so we'll definitely have to do a part 2.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you both so much. Yes. You guys have a great rest of your evening.
You too. Thank you. Bye. That was such an amazing episode. Thank you so much, Nora, for coming on. That was, we say it every week, but love having guests on, especially when they're so, there's something about a guest who's in, a specific niche that's so interesting to me, because I'm it's not like everyone does.
Yeah, you haven't heard a lot about this.
100%.
Wow, that's something really interesting. I didn't even know that went into art law.
So specific that it's I want to know so much about it. And it would have already passed, but we'll share it on our Instagram. All the resources that she had mentioned, we'll either link them or they'll already have been posted. But definitely check out everything she says, because in a niche like that, I mean, she talked about it. It's hard to get involved as like either a new attorney or as a law student. So kind of use those resources she talked about, make those connections, and network.
We can also link the Network documentary that Nora
Yeah.
had mentioned. I
Yeah.
think that's really interesting. I mean, I love documentaries
Yeah,
on Netflix. So if
we'll
you're interested in
definitely-
art law or just in general, like this would be a really cool documentary to watch.
Yeah, about the gallery. I'll link that
Yeah.
below as well. I know I was looking it up as she was saying it, so that will be tonight's watch.
Yes, definitely. But thank you guys for tuning in.
Thank you so much. You know the drill. We will see you next Monday. But
Yes.
follow us on our Instagram, TikTok, follow us on Spotify, and download our episodes if you love us.
Yes.
Watch us on YouTube.
And
follow us
don't
on YouTube.
forget, our Girls Gone Legal Times Council Collection mugs are out now. We are actually restocking. And yeah, they're so cute, you guys. Oh, I gotta come by the mic. Yeah, they're so cute. You guys should really get one. Katie loved hers. I just gave it to her today.
I love it. Get your own.
Get your own.
In the meantime,
Stay stylish, stay sharp, and
stay legal.
bye,
Bye, guys.